Hello, everyone. Jason Hagholm here. And as 2020 is winding down with only a few days left in it, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the year end review of mixed martial arts in 2020, a very interesting year in mixed martial arts. And joining me to deal with all the happenings in mixed martial arts, I'm joined by three gentlemen that cover the sport and have watched pretty much the majority of anything major in mixed martial arts. Joining me, first of all, from theScore is Nick Baldwin. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Jason. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here.
We're very happy to have you on as well, Nick. Joining me also is Eric Marcotte from Post Wrestling. Eric, how are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thanks for having me on. We've been going back and forth on Twitter for like 2 years now, so it's great to finally talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And as well from Fightful, Shakiel Mahjouri. Most of you, though, know him as Shaq, the Shaq of mixed martial arts.
Yes, sir. Well, I got to thank you because I could be stuck on a Christmas shopping spree with my girlfriend, but I gave her my credit card and I get to be here, talk MMA, have some fun.
Well, I'm glad that I can help you out for some last minute, extra minute Christmas shopping, I guess, as Christmas went to overtime with your side of the family, Shaq. But guys, it's been an interesting year in mixed martial arts, obviously, with a pandemic that went in the way, disrupted things. But we did have a lot of great moments in mixed martial arts. And let's take a look at our first category, which is male fighter of the year. Let's start with you, Shaq. Who did you have as male fighter of the year in 2020?
Man, I struggled so much when I was actually putting this list together because first I had to rewrite the entire thing because for whatever reason I was going off the World MMA Awards nominees, which were actually from January of 2019 all the way to like July 2020. And we've just had so many fights, right? It was like 24 straight weeks of fights before this little break we got. But going back, looking at 2020, this is probably a popular answer amongst the MMA media, but I gotta go with Davison Figueiredo, man. 4 fights in 2020, 3 finishes, 3 badass finishes, plus a fight of the year candidate against Brandon Moreno. He single-handedly revived the flyweight division, and I really, really hope the UFC can keep building on that momentum because it's crazy. We went from being dead in the water to one of the most exciting divisions we got going.
Yeah, I that's definitely one of the two fighters I had in there. Nick, who did you have as fighter of the year for the male side?
I'm going Figueredo too, and I don't think this was that close. A lot of people look at it as a two-man race between Figueredo and Kevin Holland. I don't I don't hate the Holland pick, but I think Figueredo is pretty clearly number one. Um, Not to sort of go off what Shaq said, I mean, Figueiredo had a rough start to the year. He missed weight for that vacant title fight in February against Benavidez. And after that, when he knocked out Benavidez, all the controversy with the weigh-in, and then the headbutt that seemed to maybe lead to the finish, there's a lot of question marks just about the division. Was this going to be a division in the UFC by the end of the year? And it is a division, and it's probably one of the more popular divisions, or at least it's headed in that direction. And a couple of years ago, a year ago even, we wouldn't have expected that whatsoever. So I want to emphasize, not only did Figueiredo, like, his in octagon accomplishments were really impressive, but he probably did save the division. And so I think Figueiredo is number one. The quick turnaround, the quickest turnaround between title fights is really what sort of sealed the deal for me, and ending it with one of the best fights of the year can't get better than that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Henry Cejudo did win the title, and then you thought he was going to help build up that division, but moved to bantamweight. But yeah, I agree. Figueiredo's made this division a must-watch division. When, to Shaq's point, this division was nearly wiped away. Eric, are you going to make it 3 for 3 with Davison Figueiredo?
Yep, I'm enjoying the chorus. Davison Figueiredo is my fighter of the year for all the reasons just mentioned. Just to highlight the fight in which he actually won the championship against Joseph Benavidez was one of the most impressive title fight wins I can recall seeing. I mean, if memory serves correct, he dropped Benavidez 3 times before becoming the first guy to submit him. He defends his title in 2 minutes against Alex Perez, and then ends the year retaining it in a draw, in which was one of the greatest flyweight fights of all time. So just a terrific year for Deiveson Figueiredo.
Yeah, and I'm going to go make it 4 for 4. I think to all your points, he made the division a must-see division, and he was involved in every single fight was a title fight this year. And even when he didn't win the championship because he failed to make weight against Benavidez the first time, he redeemed himself. You know, we had questions. Could he make the weight? He made the weight. And then he, as Eric says, he steamrolls Benavidez. He finishes Eric Perez in about a minute and a half and then puts on a fight of the year. I don't think anyone has a resume on the male side in 2020 as impressive as Deiveson Figueiredo. And more importantly, making a division mean something. That's very impressive. So we all went 4 for 4 on that one. So well, I think there's a lot of categories we may go 4 for 4 on this year, but let's keep it moving on. So female fighter of the year, we'll start with Eric this time. Eric, who's your female fighter of the year?
This was a really tough choice for me, actually, because amongst our top female talents in the sport, it seems as though most of them competed maybe once throughout the year. And I'm talking a lot about our UFC champions and top contenders. So ultimately, I turned to Bellator and I looked at Cris Cyborg, who began with Bellator this year after signing, I think it was in the summer of last. She begins the year by defeating Julia Budd with a classic Cyborg performance, wins the Bellator Women's Featherweight Championship, and then a few months later in the COVID era, she defended her title with a second-round submission, which was the first submission of her career to end the year 2-0 and really get back on track after that loss to Amanda Nunes at the end of 2018.
Yeah, I mean, that's a girl I really also mulled over just because, as you said, only one fight for most of the females. But we'll move it on here. I agree. That's a solid choice. Who do you have, Nick?
I'm going Cyborg as well. I looked at Amanda Nunes. I looked at Valentina Shevchenko, Zhang Weili. None really stood out. I mean, Zhang had the epic fight with Joanna, but I don't really think a razor-thin split decision warrants female fight of the year status. Shevchenko's 2 wins were impressive, but again, doesn't scream, she was the number 1 female of the year. Nunes only fought once, can't really pick her. So as Eric said, I turned to Bellator, and Cyborg's the obvious choice, in my opinion. With her win over Julia Budd in January, she became the first fighter to hold titles, or to win titles, I guess, in the UFC, in Bellator, in Strikeforce, and Invicta FC. And considering Strikeforce has been defunct for years, that probably will never be matched just because Strikeforce isn't producing new champions. So that was a very historic win for Cyborg. And then picking up her first submission of her veteran career, I just thought that was really impressive as well later in the year. So give me Cris Cyborg for female fighter of the year.
Shakiel, who do you got?
This is fun because it's a real big juxtaposition between the men and the women, because you had a number of guys who were able to get 4 fights minimum in 2020. And then, like Eric and Nick said, when you look at the top of the women's divisions, Amanda Nunes only fought once. Weili Zhang only fought once. Valentina Shevchenko fought twice. Rose Namajunas fought once. So it's kind of slim pickings. And ultimately, there's some sort of combination of win method, number of wins, and quality of wins that you have to consider. And I just feel like Felicia Spencer, not quite the level of competition to give Amanda Nunes the nod, so she's out. Joanna, definitely the caliber to give Weili Zhang the nod, but split this, very close, tight-knit fought. I put her out of there. So I was basically down to Valentina and Cyborg. And although I have all the respect in the world for Julia Budd, when I look at Cyborg's 2 wins and compare them to Shevchenko's, I think I rank the quality of Shevchenko's overall opponents a little bit higher. So I'm going to give it to Valentina Shevchenko for 2020.
And I'm going to follow Shakiel. That's who I went with. I went with Shevchenko. I mean, she's someone that's out here building her resume. Like the Caitlin Chookagian performance is one of the more remarkable ones, especially how durable and tough Chookagian has been, working her way through and finishing Chookagian in a way that we hadn't really seen up until that point. And as the Jennifer Maia fight was tough, she still found ways to win and come away through. I had her winning that fight 4-1, as much as Joe Rogan wanted to make it seem like that fight was closer than it seemed. I really had Shevchenko as there. She's right now with, Nunes kind of on the sidelines a little bit, though, is coming back. The pound for pound best female fighter. And while I thought Cyborg had a great year and is living up to what Bellator hoped she would be, I went with what Shakiel thought. Just the level of competition that Shevchenko faced was just a little bit more. And that's why I picked the Bullet, Valentina Shevchenko, to be my female fighter of the year. And as we move down the list, let's go to fight of the year. And this is one of those I think we all could be tied. There's a couple fights that are really in the running, but we'll start again with you, Shakiel. What was your fight of the year for 2020?
There's honorary mention I really want to give a shout out to, and that's Shane Burgos versus Josh Emmett.
Yeah,
especially Josh Emmett, man. I can't even remember didn't his ACL, his MCL just all basically come off
in like 15 seconds?
Yeah, yet he managed to go 3 hard rounds and win a fight against Shane Burgos basically on one leg. So both guys deserve credit, but especially Josh Emmett, one of the toughest people I know in the sport. That being said, it's got to be Zhang Weili, Joanna, whose last name I can't pronounce and I won't even try. Dude, maybe if it wasn't for that enormous hematoma that warped Joanna's head, I might give the nod to like a Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hook or a Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. But it's just this combination of an ultra competitive fight. It was kind of lacking the sort of like knockdown momentum swings that some of the other candidates had this year, but just, when you come out of 25 minutes and you can physically and emotionally see what these two women went through, it was just the pinnacle of the sport for me. And I wouldn't want to do them a disservice by giving the nod to anyone else.
Yeah, I think that one's the front runner. Nick, what do you got as fight of the year?
I echo everything Shaq said. It's Zhang Yuana all day for me. I think Figueiredo Moreno is a very good number 2, but what separates Zhang and Yuana from March to me is the fact that they just kept fighting for all 25 minutes. Like neither fighter backed down. Brandon Moreno and Figueiredo, they slowed down in that 5th round. I mean, they weren't like exhausted, but I mean, the pace was a lot less than the first 4. Poirier and Hooker, I think a pretty good number 3 as well. They slowed down in the last couple rounds. And then it's tough to go the Burgos and Emmett fight just because it was a 3-rounder. We didn't see as much from them as we did from Zhang and Yuana. I just thought it was a perfect 25 minutes of mixed martial arts. The hematoma on Yuana, the fact that she kept fighting. As Shaq said, I do think it was kind of missing the big momentum shifts, but there was just so much action, so many punches, so many kicks, so many everything that it was just too good. I mean, this wasn't just the best fight of 2020, but this was one of the best fights of all time.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a landmark fight when we look back 5 years for that division and women's MMA. Eric, are you going to make it 3 for 3?
Yeah, 100%. Right before that fight started, we got the video package that was inducting John Jones against Alexander Gustafsson into the UFC Hall of Fame in their fight wing. And right after that, Joanna and Zhang Weili come out, and I think they had an even better fight. The pace that they kept for 5 rounds was unimaginable. It was crazy, and the damage they were doing. The fight was so close. I think we'll probably see that one get run back one day. I can't wait, and it is definitely my fight of 2020.
Yeah, I'm going to make it 4 for 4. I mean, it's crazy that fight happened in March, literally before pandemics happened. And it's one of the lasting impressions we had before the UFC got running back in May. Rewatched this fight earlier today, and it was like both Joanna and Zhang had thrown like a combined 600 strikes at the end of round 2. And at the end of round 2, like Zhang is being carried to her corner, and they still had 3 more rounds to go where they literally sat in the pocket and traded back and forth. I mean, and it was such a close fight. Most people had it 48-47, but actually looking back, Nick, I saw you scored it 49-46 for Joanna.
Yeah, really?
That
seems
you
so
did.
Wrong.
You did. You did score the fight in favor of Jędrzejczyk.
I don't think that's crazy.
I mean, I would have to look back. I mean, maybe if I dug into my tweets, but I know I scored it for Joanna, but that 4-1 seems not right. I feel like I would have had it 3-2, but who knows? I don't
Family
remember.
decisions doesn't lie, Nick.
True enough.
I was just more like, whoa, like there's a couple people that did score, but you were one of them. And I thought you're on here, may as well bring it up. But, you know, watching it back, I didn't remember Zhang being as dominant in the first 2 rounds. And the fight kind of switched in that third. And then Jan just saved everything for the 5th round to really win the fight and do what a true champion does, save everything, and you win the fight in a championship round that way. And an unbelievable fight. And a fight, like I said, we'll look back in 5 years, and what a landmark moment for women's MMA. Moving on, let's take a look at round of the year. And I'm expecting a little bit, different picks from everyone. We'll start with Eric here. Eric, what was your round of the year for 2020?
This was definitely a fun one to revisit because it wasn't one where I had a clear answer in my head as I was looking it up. And after revisiting a bunch of these back, I ultimately went with round 2 of Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. I mean, this round was crazy. It seems impossible that neither man was knocked down throughout the round, despite Dustin landing some shots, like clean shots that looked like Hooker. How did he stand up? I have no idea. And Poirier was on the verge of being finished multiple times. He never went down. It was crazy. It was my best round of the year and one of my favorite rounds in recent memory.
Nick, what's your round of the year?
Real quick, full disclosure, I did have it 48-47 Joanna. So I'm not crazy. I'm not that crazy anyways. My round of the year was also Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker round 2. I didn't dig super deep in the sense that there might be like a one round fight that I've just totally forgot about that was insane. Because there was a lot of great rounds this year, but I agree with Eric. Once I started watching a couple of fights, I kept going back to round 2 of Poirier Hooker. I mean, Hooker started strong. He ended the round strong, nearly finished Dustin at the end. Poirier landed some huge shots, especially in the clinch that I don't know how Hooker didn't even get hurt. Like he didn't just not get knocked down, but he didn't like get tagged. He didn't wobble like at all. It's crazy.
Completely insane.
So yeah, that was just balls to the wall action for 5 minutes, and I loved every second of it. And that's the round of the year.
All right, so Shaq, are you going to make it 3 for 3 on Poirier and Hooker round 2?
Oh, that wouldn't be any fun.
No, exactly.
Well, like my fellow procrastinating Canadian here, Nick, I did not quite do the deep dive that I imagine Jason, Eric, you gentlemen did. But I did come across a few that were probably a little under the radar. And I thought, this probably isn't the right answer. It probably is Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. But I want to throw a little curveball out there. And there is some bias there because I really like this guy. But round 2 of Beneil Dariush versus Drakkar Klose.
Yeah.
Who saw that coming? Drakkar Klose rocked Beneil Dariush several times, yet he manages to come back, nearly drop Drakkar, get him against the fence, and punch the dude so freaking hard that his mouth, it's always better. When the mouthpiece doesn't quite come flying out, but it just gets like wedged by the lips on the way out. Dude, it was graphic. It was unexpected. It was insane. And now we have this legit lightweight contender in Beneil Dariush, who's not just almost in like Gilbert Burns fashion. I wouldn't say he's quite there yet, but such an enormous submission threat that now has serious knockout power. And then he follows that up with like a spinning back fist KO of Scott Holtzman. I'm going to give Beneil Dariush some credit that I probably feel got lost in the overwhelming number of great fights we saw in 2020.
Yes, that was definitely one of the better. I remember watching that one on the prelims for UFC 248. Like that was an early, definite round of the year. And shout out for you bringing it back because a lot of people totally forgot that, Shaq. And much like you had in the last category, I'm going to go an honorable mention. I'm going to go Brandon Royval, Kai Kara France, round 1, where both those two like laid each other out, were like straight up video game. Like they had their finishers on, they dropped each other. And then we saw Royval eventually finish the fight in the second round. But my round of the year, round 4, Davison Figueiredo versus the last fight that we saw Figueiredo in Brandon Moreno. Just to me, Shakiel mentioned it in the Zhang and Jacek fight. Round 4 to me was the epitome of mixed martial arts with everything you want, where it's championship rounds. You're laying it all on the line. Both fighters came forward, unloaded big shot after big shot that they thought would normally and would probably drop another man, but it didn't drop anyone there. So I go round 4, Moreno, Figueiredo. And I think when you look back at this fight, that's one where a lot of the highlights are going to come out of. as we continue this trend. And I like the variety here. One category that may not give us much variety, but you know what? I've been proven wrong so far. That's knockout of the year. Shakiel, let's start with you.
I will be genuinely upset if any of you says anything other than Joaquin Buckley versus Impa Kasanganay. And I don't know, Eric, I don't know if Eric's agreeing or looking a little guilty over there, but I can't wait to find out. How could you do anything other than that? I mean, like I said with the women's conversation, there are a number of factors you need to consider, and they're probably all a little different for each of us since we didn't have necessarily like a criteria sheet, but you have to consider the strike itself. As well as the sort of social impact that it had. And even if you want to argue that Impa Kasanganay wasn't the most high-level opponent that could be on the receiving end of such a finish, they're both huge knockout threats, and that's basically where this fight took place. And Joaquin Buckley, for God's sake, that was something straight out of a video game, to the point that Kanye West wrote a theme song for it. Mm-hmm. So if your answer isn't Joaquin Buckley, I don't want to hear it.
Nick, is your answer not Joaquin Buckley?
No, it's not, because I don't want to be Shaq to get mad at me, because that's kind of scary. No, I mean, like I was looking at a list earlier today. I don't know who wrote it, but they had Buckley at number 4, and I don't understand that. I don't understand that. Buckley is number 1, and the debate ends there. Like, it's not even close. This is, to me, maybe the second best knockout in MMA history. So I mean. And number 1 didn't happen in 2020 as well. So it's number 1 all day. I mean, the spin, the actual kick, the thud, Kasanganay falling down, the commentators, like, it was all just so, I mean, as Shaq said, it was out of a video game. It was magical. It was spectacular. And it was one of those fights where it's a random prelim fight on October 10th on a random fight night. But we're going to remember where we were when Buckley landed that kick. We will. I mean, the knockout of the year is so subjective because you can weigh, I mean, Kasanganay wasn't the most experienced fighter. You can talk about how important this fight was. Again, it was a prelim fight. But to me, style points are sort of the outweigh everything else. This was a beautiful knockout and one of the most insane ever. So Buckley, absolutely number 1.
Eric, your knockout of the year.
Easy. Buckley's knockout of Impa Kasanganay was just insane. That'll be on the highlight reels forever. I'll give some honorable mentions just to switch things up a bit when the answer was so obvious. But Cody Garbrandt's finish of Rafael Sunsao, where he had his fist practically on the ground and just raised it up with that hook to flatline him. That was incredible. Beneil Dariush actually had a knockout of the year candidate as well against Scott Holtzman, his spinning back fist. So credit where it's due to them and everyone else who had an insane knockout throughout the year, but it was an easy number 1.
And if I may interject, my number 2 probably was, without doing way too much digging, Kevin Holland finishing Jacare with a punch off his back. That was insane. But you know, it's a bad year to be anyone not named Joaquin Buckley in that sense.
Yeah, I think my knockout of the year is obviously to make it 4 for 4, Joaquin Buckley, just on like the creativity of what he did. Like sometimes you see a fighter take a risk with like 3 seconds in the round where, if it doesn't work, I'll get taken down, but whatever, the round's going to be over. There's like 2.5 minutes left in that second round. And he still went out and risked it. And, you know, hey, as they say, no risk it, no biscuit. And just as he spins, like he straight up of what like Rob Van Dam used to do in WWE, like no one really saw that coming. Kasanganay obviously didn't, as he took a big spill and did the Nestea plunge. And really, this was a knockout that went viral. Like, it made Joaquin Buckley get pushed to the moon, as he's now getting opportunities that he never would have gotten had he not had that kind of a knockout. I have some mentions as well. I thought Magomed Bibilutov had a spinning wheel kick at ACA 112, which was just insane. Like, maybe in any other year, that one's going to be your knockout of the year. But, you know, as everyone has said, it was Buckley's year. But as well, Mamed Khalidov had a switch kick with
the same night.
Yeah, the same night, like literally hours before the Buckley kick. But yeah, Joaquin Buckley, who, once again, just thinking of like, this was a guy that just had like a fight on LFA, was a last minute replacement for Kevin Holland, and is now getting a serious push as being a top contender for a big top welterweight. in 2020, or middleweight, excuse me, going into 2020.
I gotta say, how much does it suck to be the other dude? Is like, I just notched the best KO of my career, possibly of the year, and like, not 10 minutes later, it's obsolete and out of people's minds.
I mean, in the main event of that UFC card, Corey Sandhagen picked up a spinning back kick or a spinning head kick knockout, and
who cares?
No one cared.
Yeah, no one was doing anything as creative as what Buckley had done. So, as they say, knuck if you buck, and Buckley bucked his way to having the knockout of the year. This one's an interesting category. Breakthrough fighter of the year. We'll start with you, Eric.
So for this one, I ultimately went. This took a lot of thought because there was a lot of people who broke through this year, and I actually chose someone who's been in the UFC for a couple years now, and that was Kevin Holland. So prior to 2020, he had a 3-2 record in the promotion, and this was a guy that I think from his first fight you can watch him and say, okay, this guy has something. But what that something was and how far that something could get him couldn't be said. In 2020, this guy goes 5-0. Picks up 4 finishes, and one of those is over Jacare Souza. He established himself as a top 10 middleweight in the world, which is where he is in the rankings right now, and he's going to have a very big 2021.
Nick, your breakthrough fighter of the year.
I'm going Khamzat Chimaev. I think it's probably another 2-man race between Chimaev and Kevin Holland. I ultimately went with Chimaev, and the reason for that is Khamzat Chimaev wasn't a UFC fighter in July. At the beginning of July, no one except the caposas of hardcore MMA fans knew who this guy was. And then he comes onto Fight Island, wins 2 fights in 10 days, incredibly devastating, dominant fashion. I mean, the strike differentials are probably historic. And then he goes out there and murks Gerald Meerschaert in 17 seconds. And my breakthrough pick is a little based on all the hype he's got, in which maybe isn't completely warranted, because he hasn't beaten anyone that good. I mean, Gerald Meerschaert, that was a solid win, but he hasn't beaten anyone close to top 15 at either middleweight or welterweight. But this is a guy who wasn't on the roster and is now set to fight the number 3 ranked welterweight in the world, Leon Edwards. And this is a guy that a lot of people are comparing to Khabib Nurmagomedov. A lot of people think is a future UFC champion. If that's not breaking through, I don't know what is. So Khamzat Chimaev is my breakthrough fighter of the year.
Shakiel, your breakthrough fighter.
I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I did chalk it up to a draw between the 2 aforementioned men, Kevin Holland and Khamzat Chimaev. And it's funny because had the plan, the fight between Edwards and Chimaev was supposed to be in 2020, obviously got delayed because of pandemic related issues. But I think had that fight gone on the last card of the year, we would have had a clear, absolute answer, right? Either it was Kevin Holland if Khamzat lost, or if it was Khamzat if he won. Now I'm not too sure. If you're going strictly off the performances in the octagon, I think you got to give it to Kevin Holland. He beat more guys. He beat better competition. Jacare Souza heads and levels above everyone else in all the opponents between those 2 guys. But there's something about the intangibles of Khamzat Chimaev, the way he's been able to capitalize on the attention and the star power. And you can't, you can question the quality of the opposition he's faced. I think Gerald Meerschaert gave us some answers, because I do respect his abilities at a relatively high level. But just the fact that the man basically went unstruck in 3 straight fights, did nothing but wall upon people without getting so much as a nick on him, is super impressive. And I do think you have to take his performances into account. But I just can't decide. Kevin Holland and Khamzat Chimaev, they both deserved it. I kind of wish we got to see the Leon Edwards fight before year's end.
Yeah, I mean, we would have, as you said, we would have had a definitive answer. But my breakthrough fighter of the year is Chimaev, because Chimaev came in, had one of the most dominating debuts ever in the UFC, 2 straight 10-7 rounds, which I don't think we'll ever see again from someone debuting in the promotion. And then Dana, brings him back a couple weeks later, and he, beats up Reese McKee. And, a lot of people say, well, the competition level is not there. But even when they upped his competition in Meerschaert, he knocked him out in maybe a year that could have been one punch knockout of the year who in any other year. But I think it's got to be him. The UFC's just, wanted to strap the rocket to him. They believe he's going to be the face of, a welterweight, a middleweight, what have you. He's willing to put him wherever they want to put him. And, this Edwards fight is a big test for him. And as well, anytime someone had fallen through in his weight class, he was willing to step up. The UFC just didn't let that happen. I think it's got to be Chimaev. That was a guy we just couldn't keep talking about. Like, people are already talking, could he beat the top 10 in these divisions? Like, I don't think we've seen someone really get talked about like that in about 5 to 10 years. So the likes there of Khamzat Chimaev is my breakthrough fighter of the year. Let's circle back. I did skip this category, but submission of the year. And we'll start with you, Shakiel. What was your submission of the year for 2020?
This is another one, kind of like round of the year, where I wasn't too sure. I had to go do a little digging because nothing really stuck out. But I think I'm going to give it to Ariana Lipski, who had just a nasty knee bar against Luana Carolina back in back in July, I think it was. Man, like, she got on top, reverse mount, and just wrenched that thing. I remember I was genuinely uncomfortable. I could feel my reoccurring knee injuries, just freaking out, sympathizing with Carolina. That is the one I remember having the most like visceral reaction to.
Nick, your submission of the year.
It's the McKeotine, I believe is what they're calling it. AJ McKee tapping out De'Aaron Caldwell in just, I think, maybe under a minute, maybe just over a minute in their Bellator semifinal lightweight tournament bout. This was unexpected. This was unorthodox. This was impressive. This was everything. I mean, first of all, to tap out De'Aaron Caldwell, who's an accomplished wrestler, especially as AJ McKee, who obviously is well-rounded and one of the rising stars in MMA, but has never really stood out as a huge submission threat, was ridiculously impressive. And just the way he did it, the unorthodox nature of that submission, I don't even know what it was. It was a neck crank, but it wasn't really a neck crank. It was just like, it was a McGuillotine or whatever the hell they're calling it. It was incredible. And he did it in 45 seconds or 60 seconds. AJ McKee submission of the year, hands down.
Eric, your submission of the year.
I also went with Lipski's brutal knee bar. I mean, my favorite kind of submissions are the ones that really make me cringe, the ones that make me feel uncomfortable inside. So it was just a clear winner.
Yeah, I'm going to go with what Nick said, the McKeotine, because to invent a form of a submission in a sport that you kind of know what every kind of submission is, that's impressive. To submit Caldwell in like just under a minute, under 2 minutes is impressive. And just to, add another dimension to your game. Like, we know McKee is a solid, wrestler. He's got some great knockouts, but he's becoming one of the brand faces of Bellator. And you just add that to a highlight tape like that and just inventing a submission, being creative. Like, creativity was a big thing. We talked about it with Buckley. That's another guy that found some creativity in the McKeotine. And I like the name for that. So now everyone's got to beware when they take him down that they may get caught in this unorthodox submission. Comeback of the year. Let's move on to that category. Eric, let's start with you. What was your comeback of the year in MMA?
So comeback of the year is an interesting category, right? Because you can take it in a number of ways. You can say someone who physically returned to the octagon for the first time in a long time, say Dominic Cruz, although he's probably not your winner. Or it could be somebody who was, really getting beaten up in the first round of the fight and came back to win it. I went with somebody who had a career turnaround this year, and that was, to me, Marcin Tybura. So coming into 2020, Tybura, just to be brutally honest, felt like he was on the verge of being cut. He had lost 4 of his last 5 fights. He had been knocked out in 3 of them. And when he won, oftentimes it wasn't in very interesting fashion. In 2020, he fought 4 times. He went 4-0, and he picked up his first stoppage victory in 10 fights against Greg Hardy to close out the year. I think he's back in the heavyweight rankings now. I could be wrong about that. But either way, he went 4-0 this year, saved his job, and made a huge turnaround. So credit where it's due.
Wow, that's definitely throwing one out there I wasn't expecting, but I like it, Eric. Nick, who's your comeback of the year in 2020?
I'm going to give two. I'm going to give one for an actual fight that was a comeback in the fight, and then more of a career resurgence, career comeback. So the first one, the sort of career turnaround, I give it to Cody No Love Garbrandt. This is a guy who lost 3 in a row, a couple years in a span of a couple of years, all knockouts, former bantamweight champion who really looked like he was kind of just done, and he's still young. And then he goes out there and, as we talked about earlier, lands one of the best knockouts of the year against Hafilo Sunsao. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's reactions was, hey, Cody Garbrandt is back. He's back in a big way. He's not done, and he's still a bantamweight to watch. And now it sounds like he's going to be fighting back at, or not back at flyweight, but fighting at flyweight, whether or not his next fight is for the belt against Figueiredo or not. Yeah, it's clear that Garbrandt is still a contender. He is not done. He's not washed up. He fight IQ seems to be getting better. So that's my career comeback. And then the in-fight comeback, I'm going to give it to Trevin Jones taking out Timur Valiev. Valiev looked to be just sort of handing Jones a quick loss in that one. And then Jones just comes back as a huge underdog, stepped up on short notice, after getting rocked, takes out Valiev himself. And so that was a crazy win, crazy performance, and I give it to him.
Before I move on to Shakiel, I was going to pick the same Trevin Jones one, but unfortunately, it seems like the Nevada State Athletic Commission has wiped that one out. It's now a no contest, even though it did happen.
It's such a dumb rule. I didn't actually forget about it, but I didn't even bring it up because, like, it's a win. It's a win, and end of debate.
For sure. Unfortunately, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, they will doubt you on that, Nick.
Yeah,
Shakiel, what is your comeback of the year in 2020?
You can tell I'm indecisive. I did the same thing as Nick. I picked one career comeback, one fight comeback. Hey, let the man smoke his weed. I'm giving it to Trevin Jones. He was as close can be to losing that first round. I think it was a body shot that really troubled him. And it's one of those things I actually give the referee a lot of credit for. There's actually a lot of controversy that night because, like, for example, later on the same card, my runner-up was Daniel Rodriguez versus Dwight Grant, right? And Daniel gets dropped really badly and the ref lets him fight, and he doesn't afford Dwight Grant the same opportunity, but it's because what Trevin and what Daniel got hit with were body shots. They're still there. They just can't really move. So I actually applaud the referees for giving these two guys a chance to just sort of weather the storm. They were still blocking the shots, but they just couldn't function. And once they got their legs back under them, we saw Trevin Jones comes back, enormous second round fin knockout. And if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the biggest underdog wins of the year. I think Shauna Dobson might be the only one that cashed him higher. Comeback of the career, career comeback of the year. Y'all are sleeping on Glover Teixeira. It's been a bit of a journey, but Glover Teixeira, 41 years old, tied currently for the best UFC run of his career. And it's saying something that UFC president Dana White is at least willing to humor the idea of Glover versus Jan, and not entirely shut it down when you've got this money fight between Jan and Izzy there. I really do hope that Glover Teixeira gets the first crack at the light heavyweight title. This is obviously his last big run, and it's incredible the fact that he's been able to adapt and keep up. So I wouldn't want to do Glover Teixeira any disservice by ending this rant with anyone other than him.
Yeah, my comeback of the year was exactly what Shakiel said. It's got to be Glover Teixeira. This was a guy that was looking like he was about to wind his career down, just become one of those journeyman fighters in the UFC. And then the Anthony Smith fight happened where he absolutely steamrolls Smith, beats him up so bad that Smith's teeth are falling around in the octagon, which was one of the more memorable things. And then, they give him the step up against a guy that, fought John Jones pretty well in Santos, and he takes a couple big shots, looks like he's going to be dropped, weathers them, and comes back and finishes Santos with a rear naked choke submission. So, at 41 to do that as well, like getting up there in age. And as you said, Shakiel, like Dana White is willing to at least entertain the idea, realizing this is the last run of a guy that's, had many big wars in our promotion and has been here for over maybe 10, like close to 10 years, at least in the UFC. I think that's impressive. And just the level of competition that he's beating these younger guys, especially at light heavyweight where they hit with so much power, to still take a licking and keep on ticking and put on a run that he put it in 2020. It has to be Glover Teixeira for me. And if I had a fight, it was going to be the Trevin Jones one, but I'm going to unfortunately follow with what the Nevada State Athletic Commission says now. It no longer existed. It went up in smoke, as they say. Moving on though, what is your story of the year? Because there's been plenty of interesting stories in 2020, but what's everyone's story of the year? Let's start with you, Shakiel.
The media are all a bunch of dipshits. I don't know what to say on this show. Clearly. No, I'm going to go with, I'm being woefully optimistic, but all year I've been feeling this rising tide of fighter rights. It started with John Jones, Jorge Masvidal willing to publicly speak out on the fact that they're being asked to take these big fights without proper compensation. And, Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson went to bat for one another. Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor basically created this upcoming fight at UFC 257 for themselves. And I know that that's not the case for a lot of guys, but the point is, it seems like the bigger fighters are willing to use their voice, even if it's for selfish purposes. Couple that with the fact that the UFC antitrust lawsuit will move forward as a class action suit. And if they don't settle out of court, and there's a lot of ifs, but if they don't settle out of court and the class action suit goes in favor of the plaintiffs, we're going to see huge sweeping changes in not just the sport, but possibly a lot of industries. So I don't know, I'm being optimistic, but it feels like this is the beginning of a potential climax that could have really big implications on the sport.
Yeah, it's something we've heard about and hoped for a long period of time. And maybe the wheels are finally in motion, as you say, Shakiel, for some unionization. Nick, what was your story of the year for 2020?
I think the easy pick would be just the COVID-19 pandemic in general, just because how much it's impacted the sport of mixed martial arts, from fight cancellations to event cancellations to seeing Dana White rent Fight Island, however you want to call that. I mean, go to Abu Dhabi. The COVID test, there's been so many fight cancellations. Even recently, they'll continue to deal with that into 2021. But I'm not going to pick that just because that's the story of the world of 2020. It's affected everything, not just MMA. So I think the MMA specific story of the year is Khabib Nurmagomedov retiring at 29-0 after a very impressive win over Justin Gaethje. This wasn't the biggest surprise per se, but this was unprecedented, seeing a champion in his absolute prime after what could be the best win of his career retire at 29-0. One of the most dominant fighters we've ever seen, or probably the most dominant fighter we've ever seen. One of the greatest fighters that has ever walked the planet. Stepping away on his own terms, something that only a few fighters have done. George St. Pierre, Henry Cejudo earlier in the year as well. Khabib retiring has to be number one for me. This will impact 2021 for sure. I mean, now we'll see. Is Khabib going to come back to fight GSP? Will Dana White bring him back? Is Conor Poirier going to be for the vacant belt? What happens with the division? There's so many storylines to come out of this one storyline. Khabib has to be number one for me.
All right. I like that one, especially I saw some news today that Khabib did say that Poirier and McGregor will be champion, but I know Dana still has that meeting with him, so we shall wait and see what ends up happening with there. But and especially a moment like that just caught everyone by surprise. That's a good choice. Eric, what was your choice for story of the year?
Well, Khabib wasn't the only all-time great to announce his retirement this year. Both John Jones and Conor McGregor announced that they would be calling it quits in 2020. So no, you know what? I'll go with the easy choice because I think it does need to be on our list. COVID-19 and its effect on MMA promotions across the globe. Ultimately, people will remember 2020 as the year of COVID, and even when revisiting fights, the empty arena era will never really be forgotten. There's been a lot of big moments that have happened in the cage this year, like, say, Khabib Nurmagomedov's retirement fight, or, say, Anderson Silva's last fight in the UFC, Daniel Cormier's retirement fight, so on and so on.
Wow, that was this year.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year, man. But and we've had other promotions, even outside the UFC, that have been really negatively affected by COVID. For example, I don't think PFL even had a card this year.
No.
Could be off on that, but I don't think so. So, yeah, it's the story of the year.
Yeah, I'm going to echo with what Eric said. It's COVID-19 and its effects because, pretty much once Dana White said he didn't give a fuck about COVID-19, well, it came and reared its head and shut down pretty much the world and his business. I mean, UFC had to make so many changes. They bought an island. They had events at their apex, but Bellator took like 4 or 5 months to get going again before they were able to implement their bubble. As Eric said, PFL didn't even have a season. They canceled their season and left fighters without, high and dry, and finally getting to take some fights at the end of the year. But as well, the effect on the regional scene, which is the lifeblood of this sport, and getting a lot of fighters, to the next level and, new blood in there. And a lot of promotions couldn't be able to run shows, especially, the regional scene here in Canada. Like 0 shows happened since March. I mean, some promotions were able to find ways to get going, but they had some good backing with a solid streaming service like Fight Pass behind them. But just the overall effect, I mean, and fights falling out just left, right, due to COVID. Just look at the last 3 UFC shows where we had the last show, we had 4 fights fall out due to COVID. It has to be COVID's effect, and especially a year where COVID is going to be the story that we look back in 2030 on 2020. It's going to be the pandemic that unfortunately wreaked havoc.
If I can really quickly add, I think another sort of wrinkle that makes COVID such a big story within MMA specifically is that the UFC was basically the first major sports league back. May 9th, whether or not you thought that card UFC 249 should have happened in Jacksonville, it did. Dana White, his plan did ultimately work. They were the first ones back. That was their plan, and they were successful. We saw a few months of really UFC getting a lot of attention from mainstream news and other sports organizations that wouldn't necessarily cover the UFC because that was the only thing on. Yeah. So I think that's another thing that makes it such a huge story in MMA specifically.
And if I may give a really distant 10th, mostly because we didn't see a whole lot of fallout from it, but John Jones moving to heavyweight when it first came out was super intriguing, right? Because it's something we've been waiting on for years, and we didn't really get to see it in 2020. I don't even know when we're going to see it in 2021, but any other year, I think that might have been higher up on the list.
Yeah, and to Nick's point as well, it was once UFC came back, it was these other sports leagues found a way to come back. The NBA was able to put a bubble in. The NHL was able to put a bubble in play. I'm sure they were working on it, but the UFC was the first one that kind of started to implement a bubble system in Jacksonville, then in Vegas, and then Fight Island. So, yeah, and plus just the early pay-per-view buy rates for some shows that were headlined by guys that have no pay-per-view track record were through the roof because everyone was just so crazy for sports and needed to fill that itch. So
I real quick, again, I think the COVID era also shined some light on the Dana White media relationship and how that has played out over the years and how it continues to play out, manager and, MMA media relationships and fighter and, fighter and media so many different things that, whose side are you on? Do you want the UFC to go on? Do you not? It's just been very interesting to see how people, respond to each other with COVID going on.
Oh, don't worry, Nick. Dana will be on this mentioned in the show a little later on as we move down the topics. Let's look at upset of the year. This is a year we didn't have a lot of major upsets, but there were some. And let's start with Eric. I think Eric will start here. Eric, what was your upset of the year?
It got a mention earlier on the show, so I think I gave it the nod just because of the odds, and that was Shayna Dobson's TKO finish over Marina Agapova. I mean, Agapova was a minus 1,900 favorite going into that fight, which was ridiculous. They were ridiculous odds, but nonetheless, that's what they were. And for Dobson to pick up that second round finish, despite having a losing professional record going into that fight, was a huge moment for her. And yeah, that's what I'm going with for upset of the year.
Nick, your upset of the year?
I would usually go with the biggest odds because generally that's what I would consider the biggest upset, the most surprising result, so to speak. But I'm going to go with the Valley of Jones fight we talked about. Again, Nevada Commission out the window, still an upset in my eyes, still a comeback. That's what I'm going with, just because Trevin Jones stepped up on a day or two's notice. Didn't have a great record heading into heading into his UFC debut. The odds were wide. I mean, this was a big upset on paper as well. But Valiev, I mean, a PFL and WSOF standout, a lot of hype around him, and Trevin Jones just shut him down. I mean, he had to battle through some adversity, of course, as we talked about with the comeback aspect of that fight. But it was also, in my eyes, a huge upset and a very surprising result. So to me, that's the upset of the year.
Shakiel, your upset of the year.
Now, this wasn't necessarily the biggest upset in my personal opinion, but sort of when I look at the bigger scope of MMA fans, you got to go all the way back to January and look at the person who was basically the antithesis of Conor McGregor, and that is Roxanne Modafferi, the sweetest person in the MMA space, beating highly touted Maycee Barber, UFC 246, I think, prelim headliner. Who saw that coming? I mean, I kind of did, but I know a lot of people are always sleeping on Roxy. Unfortunately, it's the story of her career because she's just so nice and just such not what you think of when you think of the stereotypical fighter. But she swept Maycee Barber, even got a 10-8 round, beat the living crud out of her. And I was obviously sad for Maycee, but as a big Roxy fan, I was glad to see her shut up a whole lot of deniers on that evening.
Well, I was going to go with Eric's choice just on the odds of Shanna Dobson over Maria Agpova, just because, I think it is one of the biggest upsets odds-wise in the history of the UFC and the sport. But just to be a little different, I will go with Kevin Croom over Roosevelt Roberts, where Kevin Croom was a journeyman fighter, had maybe thought about, giving it up. He's fought in pretty much everyone that eventually made it to the UFC. And then in his UFC debut, he gets a 31-second guillotine choke over Roberts, a, highly touted up-and-coming prospect. I'll count it much like how Nick counted the Trevin Jones ones. But once again, this one also deemed a no contest thanks to the Nevada State Athletic Commission doing their part. But to me, that was one because Kroom was a guy that had fought a war actually in the FAC promotion to win their championship at lightweight against Anderson Hutchinson. And then, he comes out there, gets that win. And luckily his suspension's over. He's got a fight with Bruce Leroy coming up in February. But that'd be my upset of the year, would be Kevin Croom over Roosevelt Roberts. And
Bro, I gotta say, I did a post-fight interview with Kevin, and I could predict that he was gonna fail his post-fight drug test just based on the interview I did with him.
Well, this is a man that known to come out in like pajama pants for his walkouts on the regional scene. So yeah, definitely someone that's living up to his nickname. He's hard hitting, but in other aspects as well. Moving on to Feud of the Year. This was one I did struggle with a little bit until I remembered there's one individual that's involved in everything feud-wise. So let's start with Shakiel. Shakiel, what's your Feud of the Year in 2020?
It's me versus Nick Baldwin. I feel like I've been bullying him ever since I got into that. He was one of the people who helped me get into the MMA space, and I've been doing nothing to sort of
but harass
me. But
yeah.
Now he's got his hair on his chest. He comes after me hard. No, I think people are gonna hate my choice. And there's a lot of recency bias, but I'm gonna say it: Jake Paul versus the world. Jake Paul has dominated MMA discussions on websites don't want to cover him, including Fightful, including Bloody Elbow, including MMA Fighting. But man, I'm not saying his comedy is good. I'm not saying his shtick is good. But in the MMA space, where a lot of these people don't know how to be entertainers, or their entertainment talents are just like super surface level, race baiting and stuff like that, there's a low bar for entry. And Jake Paul, when it comes to bringing the entertainment, compared to a lot of other people in the MMA space, he's got it. Unfortunately, we're talking about Jake Paul versus Dylan Dennis. We're talking about Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. We're talking about Jake Paul versus Conor McGregor at this point. It's insanity, but it's working. So I'm going to give it to Jake Paul.
Jake Paul, who has revived X-Pac heat for the MMA community, but will still be a focal point of mixed martial arts coverage, even though he's probably not fighting MMA at all. So
exactly. That's the insanity of it, right? Like, you got to give credit where credit's due. People are like, hey, get off this guy's wiener. I'm like, look, I make a video about him. People click on it. I'm here to serve the public interest for better or worse.
Nick, is Jake Paul your feud of the year?
No, and Shaq, you're lucky I didn't just close the Zoom call right as you said it. I didn't want any Jake Paul talk on this show.
Oh, this
is
isn't
an
the
MMA
last one you're
show,
gonna get from me either.
not a YouTuber show, Shaq. I know you work for ET Canada and you're all about that, like, celebrity
Guilty.
stuff, whatever it is.
So guilty.
But yeah, that is not my feud of the year. My feud of the year, I was gonna go Dana White versus John Jones, but I think we're gonna get a lot of Dana White talk from you guys in a second. So I'm gonna go an actual fight. Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. These guys didn't like each other. These guys still don't like each other. There was a lot of, I actually didn't mind the trash talk leading up to it. Some people maybe wasn't their thing, but I enjoyed it. It made me excited for the fight, and it was just such a big fight. It was an important fight, and on paper, Adesanya's toughest test proved not to be whatsoever. And then afterwards, there was Adesanya's celebration. There was Costa sort of talking, I want an immediate rematch. I didn't like this. Izzy isn't like a true sportsman, whatever he said. That's the feud of the year for me.
Yeah, the trash talking on Costa's side was some of the most bizarre trash talking I've ever seen, but it did get attention. So I guess credit to him for that. But yeah, as you said, not a fight that didn't live up to the bill of the trash talking, but a very impressive performance for Adesanya. But Eric, your feud of the year for 2020.
Much like you, Jason, this was by far the toughest category for me because unlike previous years, maybe it's just because we didn't have all the press conferences or whatever, it didn't feel like we had those year-long feuds that really caught the public's interest like pretty much every year prior. So this was a tough one for me. I almost went with Paulo Costa versus Israel Adesanya. I almost went with Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier, which was not personal, but based in, competition, a 3-year feud coming to its end. But in the end, I did chose to go a bit more personal, which was Dana White against everybody. Everybody, whether they be the government, the commissions, fighters, the entire media. Yep, Dana had words for all of them. And I feel like that probably caught the most headlines throughout the year. And yeah, Dana White versus everybody. Feud of the year, 2020.
Some of his fighters, too.
Oh yeah, 100%. Everybody.
Yeah.
Dana had more than words. He had a 2.5-minute video that he put out afterwards at the end of the year when I was like, aren't you on vacation?
That video was the equivalent to pleasing yourself in Times Square.
Oh,
yes.
It was, to put it PC-wise, it was the old school Barry Horowitz pat on the back. Look how great I did. But yeah, I'm with Eric. That's my feud of the year. This guy was literally picking fights with everyone, media members, fighters, commissions. How dare you say I'm not going to be able to put this show on on this Indian grant land? And then unfortunately it was canceled. And then he went straight to Marcotte. Yeah, we gotta, do the right by our TV partner and whatever, but we're going to Florida and whatever. Like, this guy couldn't not get in front of a camera and couldn't make himself look awful every time he stood out in front of it with his stances on COVID at the start of it and just ranting about everyone and anything. So it has to be Dana White. Like, this guy was more talked about in any year before, especially the video. The video at the end of this year was the icing on the cake.
Sealed the deal.
Was the icing on the cake for me for Dana White being a part of the feud of the year. This is the last category, guys. We're ending 2020. We've said our best ofs, our feuds, our knockouts of the year, but we're heading into a new year and hopefully better things happen. But what's your biggest hot take for 2021 in mixed martial arts? And I have a feeling I know what Shakiel's may be, but we'll start with Eric. Eric, what's your biggest hot take of 2021?
Just between the four of us, I think John Jones's retirement might not stick. Okay, I'm going for a couple fight predictions here. I'm going to say in 2021, Francis Ngannou knocks out both Stipe Miocic and John Jones.
Wow.
That's hot.
Like
That's hot. Nick, your hot take of going into 2021.
Well, kind of along those lines, doesn't have to be exactly, but my hot take, and maybe this isn't that hot according to you guys, but I do. Stipe Miocic retires. I think the UFC heavyweight champion will be a retired fighter by the end of 2021. I I'm giving him a pretty good shot against Ngannou. I know a lot of people think Ngannou is going to go out there and starch him, but a lot of people thought that would happen in 2018. And is Francis Ngannou actually better than he was 2 years ago or 3 years ago? I don't know. So Stipe could win, but I don't think he gets past John Jones. If he gets past Ngannou, I don't think he'll get past John Jones. And then I think at 38, 39, he's a firefighter. He has a kid now. I think, there will be better things for him besides fighting when he does lose the title. And I think Stipe is going to call it quits by the end of 2021.
All right. I like your hot take, Nick. Shakiel, what's your hot take? I'm expecting this one to be extra spicy.
Jake Paul knocks out Conor McGregor to win the UFC lightweight title.
We're not. I will say I'm unfortunately still stuck. I've kind of got blinders on. I can't look too far into 2021. This is a weird one. People are very decisive on this, and it's kind of boxing related. I think Jake Paul beats Dylan Dennis in a boxing match in 2021. I am not confident in Dylan Dennis's overall MMA skills. Jake Paul is at least serviceable as a pro boxer who should be amateur. It's the only discipline he's focused on. And I think he's smart enough to pick the lowest stake, highest reward kind of fights he can. I would not at all be surprised if Jake Paul beats Dylan Dennis in boxing in 2021. And if you're going to complain about my Jake Paul conversations, you better not have had Burger King or McDonald's in the last 12 months, because they're basically on par. It's both garbage, but we all kind of love it.
No, I don't have any issues with your take. My only issue is that's a lukewarm take. Of course Jake Paul beats Dylan Dennis.
Dude, people got so mad at me when I brought up Ben Askren and Dylan Dennis losing. I got crapped all over. Maybe it's because people are like, oh, but Ben Askren's an Olympian. I'm like, Nate Robinson was good enough to be in the NBA. I don't know what we're talking about here.
Clearly his kickboxing in the Damian Maia fight was enough to sway people.
I don't know. All I know is maybe you guys don't disagree, but I got a whole lot of hate mail when I brought it up, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, the Jake Paul Ben Askren fight appears to be a thing, and I think Paul is the favorite. And I'm much like Shakiel. I am favoring Paul early on because unless Askren goes rogue and just shoots a takedown and ground and pounds, I don't think Ben's got enough of a chance on the stand-up there. My hot take, I mean, it's maybe a medium or just a light hot take, but I think we're going to see the return of a super show on CBS. I think Bellator and PFL, they'll find a way to link up and have a combined show. Both rosters have a lot of talent that people want to see. It's just they don't know where to see them, or they're not following the MMA as a whole as much. And if Bellator wants to get on CBS, they're going to need a partner, much like Elite XC continued their shows on, or if Strikeforce did, because for now, Bellator's looking to be set on CBS Sport Network, being the lead-in for some MAC conference football game. As good as that move is for how they feel, I feel if they want to be up on CBS or the Showtime cards, they got to up them up and have a spectacular co-promoted show with PFL. And PFL would get their brand out there on that kind of thing, on that kind of a platform as well. So that is my hot take, that Bellator and PFL will have a combined show in 2021.
Solid choice.
Like it.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for spending the last hour chatting about the best of mixed martial arts in 2020. But before I let you go, I'll let you guys plug all your great work and where people can find you out there on social media. Let's start with you, Eric. You're putting up a lot of the great reports and live coverage of every UFC that's gone on the past couple of years.
Yep. I cover pretty much every UFC fight night, the occasional pay-per-view at postwrestling.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Marcotte 705. And yeah, I just talk about MMA. I'm a very simple guy. I don't care about anything else.
Well, fair enough. That'll help definitely get your followers up. Nick, where can people find your great work?
People can find me on Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA, and if they want to check out my work, it's at theScore app. Just sort of on the same note, I got a bunch of end-of-year content coming, either already published or coming out in the next week or so. Top 5 fights, top 5 fighters, knockouts, bold predictions, predicting UFC champions at the end of 2021, storylines of the year, all that good stuff. So you can check it out at theScore. And thanks again, Jason, for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks again, Nick, for coming on. And Shakiel, where can people find your great work for Fightful?
Yes, I got a new Twitter handle, so hit me up at ShakFu, Shak_Fu, Shak with a K. Guys, please go over to youtube.com/FightfulMMA. We're less than 40 subs away from our end of the year goal. If you sort of ignore the recent abundance of Jake Paul content that I've been forced to upload, there's a lot of cool, unique MMA stuff, and there's more coming. We've got Corey Anderson ranking the best light heavyweights from Bellator and UFC, sort of throwing his hat into that debate. We've got world championship fighters reacting to the best KOs in MMA history. We have former title challengers ranking martial arts by effectiveness. We have UFC fighters roasting people on Cameo. It's just like a lot of entertainment-based MMA content you're not going to get with the major news outlets. So please help us do what we do. And of course, Jason, man, thank you so much for getting me out of an hour of Christmas shopping.
Hey, anything to help you out there, Shakiel, though, as Nick said, maybe we had to throw you out there to the Christmas shopping with all the Jake Paul talk, but nonetheless, we'll look forward to what Jake Paul does, what happens in MMA. And if you want to follow what I do, you follow me on Twitter. That's at jhagholm1. Co-hosting the Jason and the Gentleman podcast with Bellator bantamweight, the gentleman Josh Hill, and as well have my own YouTube page where I interview fighters ahead of their fights. So once again, Eric, Nick, Shakiel, thank you for your time, and Happy New Year. Hopefully you guys had a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year. And let's hope 2021 brings us an abundance of goods in this new year.